I'm Liam.
I'm Wayne,
You're listening to In Film We Trust YouTube.
a place where we post clips from our recent episode.
All links down below in the description.
And now, on with the show.
It's quite morbid when you think about it, but we've always been fascinated by the end of the world, haven't we?
And obviously, because this is a British film, it's taken a very social-realistic approach, which contrasts a lot of disaster films you come across, especially American ones.
It does, because when you think about the big disaster movies, apocalyptic films, your big names like Deep Impacts, Armageddon, Volcano, Day After Tomorrow, they're entertainment pieces, they're sensationalist pieces, so a lot of it is exaggerated, but it's done for entertainment purposes, whereas Threads isn't.
No, and you even get like Independence Day with Will Smith. A lot of these films, and especially from the 1950s, you'd get this outsider approach, and that plays into this apart, but it's a human story at its core, this film, and it's working that way, isn't it? There's nothing sensationalist about this.
Yeah, even like movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, War of the Worlds, it was about outsiders coming in. But yeah, this one is very, very different.
Well, a lot of them 50s ones were like allegorical for whether it was communism or some kind of authoritarianism.
Mostly the Red Scare, like McCarthyism as well.
Which do you think this plays into?
In a sense, because it is dealing with the issues of the Soviet Union, but when you have these movies about like nuclear holocausts, the Soviet Union tends to be the nation that is focused on. It tends to be the baddie in these cases.
Well, this was released in pretty much the height of the Cold War, the 1980s, before the Berlin Wall fell.
Yeah, mid-1980s, but it wasn't the first thing, like show of a documentary to cover this kind of topic, because back in 1966 you had The War Game.
By Peter Watkins, which... Because this is a film you introduced to me, Threads, and I'd never seen it, but you had actually seen both this and War Games.
Yeah, War Game it's an Oscar-winning, we'll call it a pseudo-documentary.
Yeah.
It's more like a public service announcement, what to do. It's kind of like Threads, but shorter with posher accents. It's kind of, this is what you should do. If there's an explosion, you should go to here. If there's this, you should go to here. And it's got interviews with people who are ostensibly members of the public, but it just feels like they're actors. It tries to fit in a bit of social commentary, but mostly what you should do if there's a nuclear explosion. And it'll show a few scenarios. If there's an explosion, what do you do in your house? Where do you go? Things like that. So it came out in 1966 and was controversial, to say the least.
Well, it was actually deemed too horrific to be on TV, on the advice of Prime Minister Harold Wilson at the time, wasn't it?
It did.
So you're dealing with... I mean, to be that shocked, you're not allowed to be broadcast on the BBC, because it did have a small theatrical release.
I did a very small one. It was, I remember it was withdrawn, and I was reading about this. It said that one of the reasons they withdrew it is they said, like you said, it was too horrific. They actually feared it would lead people to commit suicide.
Yeah,
it was
mass
so shocking.
suicides.
Which, watching it, it seems maybe a bit tamer now, but thinking back in the 60s when you hadn't really seen this thing before, yeah, it would have been shocking.
What was your opinion on it? Was it kind of just like Threads, but 20 years prior?
It's similar to Threads, but this is mostly the preparation for the explosion and the immediate aftermath, because Threads goes much more into the long-term effects, but this was mostly the explosion happening. It was okay. You know, there's documentaries that I've seen that cover this maybe a bit better, but it was interesting to see from a historical point of view.
Because I have saw kind of a minority opinion that they actually found War Game to be more horrific, to be more realistic. Did you sense that?
I think maybe because it was posited as a documentary rather than... Because Threads is, like, it's got its own narrative, but this is... It's supposed to be like a public service announcement from the government. So I can see that, because this makes it seem more like this is in your home. This could actually happen.
And it's not that niche. It did win the Best Documentary Oscar.
It did, yeah.
So it's got some acclaim. It's not like this is just some random, strange, periphery documentary on the side that... Though it is almost, in a sense, forgotten, because I've never really heard of War Game, have you?
I heard of War Game through Threads, because when you do research, War Games was broadcast first time on TV in 1985, and Threads was screened afterwards. So it was like a nuclear double bill, so to speak.
And this is a great companion piece to Threads and War Game, because War Game was released... It was re-released on the BBC in the mid-80s, wasn't it? For the 40th anniversary of Hiroshima.
Hiroshima, yeah.
That's true.
Seems a bit tasteless, that, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, they're like a bit of misery porn, isn't it? But yeah, Threads was... Mick Jackson was hired for this film, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Who you would never guess would go on to direct The Bodyguard, yes, the Kevin Costner film, and Volcano.
Volcano disaster film. Honestly, one of these things is not like the other.
Definitely not The Bodyguard.
No, definitely. I didn't even like The Bodyguard that much.
That's all right.
But yeah, that's very surprising. Also, Barry Hines, the screenwriter, and you can see why he's brought in.
Oh,
Barry
yes.
Hines, frequent collaborator with Ken Loach, and he was known for writing things about political and economic struggles, which this whole film is based on. He actually wrote
Kes.
the novel, Kestrel for a Knave, which would become Kes.
Did he write the novel as
He
well?
actually he wrote the novel,
Oh.
yeah, which would go on to be one of Ken Loach's most popular, most influential films.
Mick Jackson, the director of Threads, researched this in depth because he traveled to US, UK, scientific advisors. Was Carl Sagan not one of the advisors on the film?
Carl Sagan was one of the advisors in terms of giving information about the explosion itself
Yeah.
and the immediate impact. I think it was a book Carl Sagan had written.
And one of the most particular and odd kind of facts here, Mick Jackson was actually going to cast Coronation Street actors in the lead roles.
He was, which I think would have been kind of distracting because you'd be watching it trying to get invested. You'd be like, oh, that's such and such and that's such and such. I don't watch Corey. I don't know the names of any of the...
No, but he did opt for unknowns because I think it's a more authentic experience. If you're relating to them as humans rather than, oh, that bloke off the telly, you can kind of put yourself in their position a little bit more.
Yeah, it's easy to view them as regular members of the public rather than like famous people you already know.
But you've got to remember as well, at the time, whether it's 60s, 70s, Coronation Street it kind of started almost as a kitchen sink drama.
Basically, yeah.
It was like a day-to-day life of working class, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah, which, again, this film depicts. Another thing that the director and the writer did is they visited the Home Office training centre for survivors, and what they said was they were shocked at how disorganised post-war reconstruction would be. And this was one of the themes they wanted to tackle, not just how devastating the explosion and fallout would be for the country, but how hard it would be to rebuild afterwards.
Mate, I think that probably stays to this day. Do you not?
I think
what
so,
can
yeah.
you do? Think of it in a nuclear apocalypse. To be blunt, there's not much you can do, really. Is
Because it wipes out your entire infrastructure. And I was thinking about this recently. Remember when we had those storms not long ago? It took out power for a few days. That was pretty chaotic.
That was a bit of wind.
I know, that was a bit of wind. Imagine this, like just the long-term effects of this nuclear apocalypse.